Hello and welcome to the big picture. The presidential elections in India have more or less always been a sober affair. The way the constitution makers evolved the role of the president and designed the electoral college to elect the Rashtrapati is indicative of the nature of the campaign which they expected. Though it is understood that the presidential candidate is sponsored by political parties, the campaign is not expected to become political in the way general elections are fought. That may be one of the reasons why the presidential candidates are expected to resign from their respective parties before they file their nominations. The present presidential campaign has, however, acquired a certain sharpness and has also become personal, with allegations flying almost every day against the ruling Combines candidate. The tone and tenor of these allegations and its content is also making many people feel uncomfortable about it. Today we will look at the nature of the campaign and see if the sanctity and decorum of the campaign is being breached, or is this what one can expect in a coalition era? To discuss this, I have with me today Mr. S.Nihal Singh, a veteran journalist and editor who has been a witness to many presidential elections, in fact since the first presidential election in 1952. Mr. Sheshadri Chari, BJP spokesman, and Tariq Anwar, General Secretary of the NCP. Welcome to all of you. We will also be joined by a few more guests as we go along. Let me first go to Mr. Nihal Singh. Sir, you have been a witness to the presidential elections right from day one, that is from 1952 onwards. There have been instances where these elections have taken a very close contests have happened in the past. It happened in 1967, I think, when Dr. Zakir Hussain and Kota Subrao contested. Again in Neelam Sanjeev Reddy and V.V.Girish, and one or two elections later. But this election, do you see, what is the difference you see in this, in the present elections and what has been held in the past?
I think the watermark in previous elections was in 69,
Right.
as you might recall. This was Indira Gandhi's struggle, intra-party struggle
Right.
against the so-called syndicate.
Right.
And there she unofficially backed not the official Congress candidate,
Right.
and called it a conscience vote. So it was a part of a struggle, intra-party struggle, which means it became a political election in a way. But I must confess that I have never seen a presidential election like the present one, for two reasons. One is, one does not expect a presidential candidate of whatever party or non-party to go around the country canvassing for votes, however you might dress it up, saying that we want to...
But sir, this seems to have become a trend in the last 2-3 elections,
Well, it has, but not to the level it has been taken this time.
Right.
What has distressed me most about this election campaign is that you have a former Speaker of the Lok Sabha, which is a very honorable post, and this particular gentleman performed well his task as a Speaker. But the level to which he has brought the debate is very distressing. I simply don't understand, why do you have to call names for the opposing candidate? I mean, it's not decorous. After all, first you wanted a television debate, which again is totally out of character for a presidential election.
In India especially.
In India, no, because if we have a parliamentary system
Absolutely.
of democracy.
Right.
The president is, in most instances, a titular title holder.
Right.
So, to begin with that, and then flinging allegations every second day, it is very, very unbecoming and to me distressing.
Let me go to Mr. Sheshadri Chari. Mr. Sheshadri Chari, you heard Mr. Nihal saying, do you think that this campaign has, is causing distress, as it's causing distress to Mr. Nihal Singh and many other people also talk about it. Do you think this campaign could have been a little more sober?
The campaign could have been a little more sober right from the beginning, but the trend that the Congress party set this time did not evoke any kind of this kind of a sobriety as far as the presidential election is concerned. the Congress party wanted to make it a political issue, in the sense they called two representatives of two political parties and threw up some names. I mean, this is not the way you propose the name of a president. If you wanted a consensus, the Congress party, which has the prerogative of settling the set ball rolling, could have called an all-party meeting and told all of them that, look, let us have a common consensus on presidential election. This would have been a very decent way of doing it, instead of going it about in a secretive manner and then some political personality going off the record and then exposing the whole thing, and then you zoom in on one person. I mean, it all leaves a very bad taste right from the beginning. So when it has had a skewed beginning, you cannot do a course correction in between. Now, this is what the political status in the country has come down to as far as the coalition politics is concerned. So you cannot help it anymore.
I'd like to come in here.
Yes, Mr. Nihal Singh.
I think the procedure, whatever the failings of the Congress, can never justify the kind of language which has been being used by the opposition candidate about Pranab Mukherjee.
Right. We are now joined by Mr. Birendra Singh. He is the General Secretary of the AICC. Welcome, Mr. Singh. Singh, you heard what Sheshadri Chari was talking about. He blames the Congress for having started this whole process and skewed the whole process in the beginning, because of which he says it has led to this kind of a sharpness in the campaign and controversies being rigged up and things like that. So he's blaming the Congress for this.
No, actually, what I could hear, he wanted to say that the all parties meeting should have been convened,
Right.
should have been consulted. But first the party is to take a decision, then the UPA is to take a decision, and after that, when it became clear that Pranab Da is the candidate of the UPA, then the way main opposition reacted, that was not proper.
Okay. Let me get Mr. Tariq Anwar. Mr. Tariq Anwar of the NCP. In fact, Mr. Sangma, who is the presidential candidate who is contesting against Pranab Mukherjee, is was a member of the NCP, and he resigned before he filed his nomination. Mr. Tariq Anwar, you have been listening to the debate. You think he was your own party man, and yesterday your party has come down pretty sharply against him. You think Mr. Sangma's the campaign which is holding is something which could have been avoided, which could have been a little more sober?
Yes, you have said rightly, and I entirely agree with Nihal Singh ji that we should maintain dignity for particularly the presidential election. I am feeling very embarrassment because very recently Sangma ji was a member of my party.
A very distinguished member also.
Of course, he was one of the founder
Yes.
member. So I am feeling very embarrassment because everybody was expecting him that he was a Lok Sabha speaker and he was dignified person, he was chief minister, he was cabinet minister. So he should at least maintain that dignity. But I can very sorry that he is not maintaining that dignity.
But Mr. Tariq Anwar, according to Mr. Sheshadri Chari, he also agrees that the campaign should have been more sober, but he blames the ruling UPA and the Congress party for not having taken the opposition into confidence, for having started this whole process on a wrong note.
No, this is not the, I think this argument is not valid. They can say, that can claim that Congress has not consulted them and opposition has been not taken into confidence. But it doesn't mean that it allows all type of nonsense talk is going on. I think nobody will approve this type of language and this type of charges against the presidential candidate.
Right, right. Mr. Chari, let us for a moment also, no, Mr. Chari, let me ask you this question. For a moment, let us take your argument that the whole process was started on a wrong note. But do you think the kind of language which is being used, the kind of points, issues being raised, I mean, is it something which an Indian presidential election deserves to be brought into?
Once the election process is started, once the UPA candidate, I mean, let us not forget that both are presidential candidates.
Absolutely.
One does not have an exalted status, and
No.
the other one, just because he is not likely to win, I am saying not likely to win, we don't know the results yet.
Right.
That his status does not come down anymore.
Absolutely. Nobody is
So we
saying
should
that.
not put one person on a higher pedestal. Number one. Number two, if there are genuine points that have been raised by Mr. Sangma or somebody else on his behalf,
Mr. Chari, what are
I
those
think
genuine?
you cannot fault him on these issues.
No, what are those genuine points? What are the points
So-
which you think are genuine?
No, they have raised an issue of office of profit, holding an office of profit.
Right.
Well, they have every right and prerogative to raise these issues. I mean, just
No, we
because
are not-
somebody raises an issue against Pranab Mukherjee, why
No,
do
no,
you
we
want
are-
to put Mr. Pranab Mukherjee
No, Mr.
on such
Chari.
a high pedestal
No, Mr.
even before he becomes the president of India?
No, absolutely, Mr. Chari. Let me make it clear. We don't. I am at least. We here are not saying that they had no right to raise the issue of office of profit. It was a very valid issue which they raised. But the fact of the matter is the person who is concerned, who has to take a decision on this matter, which is the Secretary General, has taken a decision. Now it is up to the candidates to go to the Supreme Court
Fine,
later
so-
or whatever it is. Now I am talking of the other issues. I am talking of the other issues which have been
all
raised.
these all these logical issues are available to them, all these logical avenues are available to them. So you cannot stop any other person or a party or a candidate from exploring all these possibilities. But if such an unpleasant situation had to be prevented or stopped in the beginning, I think all the political parties should have been equally responsible right from the beginning. I am just quoting. I fully agree with Mr. Tariq Anwar that he feels very embarrassed because one of his members of the founders of his party has gone against his own party. But the issue is, during the NDA government, when Atal Bihari Vajpayee called for all of party meeting, and he called 4 members of the Congress party, Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, the present Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and 2 more, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee himself attended that meeting,
Right.
and he proposed the names. And then it was in that meeting that Dr. A.P.J.Abdul Kalam's name was agreed upon by both the Congress and the BJP. Only the Communist Party put up an independent candidate. Of course, he lost. But we never told the Communist Party that they are undemocratic or what they are doing is against bringing down the status of the president and all that. I mean, the Congress also need not be so touchy about the person whom they have projected as the president of India.
Okay, Mr. Chari, it also depends.
After all, till yesterday he was the finance minister.
It also, Mr. Chari, it also depends on what was the nature of the previous campaign. Again, anyway, we need to go into a short break now. We'll come back and continue this discussion. Please keep watching. Welcome back. We are discussing the presidential elections campaign and seeing if there has been a breach in the sanctity. Coming to you, Mr. Nihal Singh. Mr. Sheshadri Chari, while making several points, one of the points which he made is that this is a coalition era. This is the way it is going to be.
I'm reminded by my friend, Mr. Chari, about a good lawyer arguing a bad case. I mean, his arguments are totally specious. Does it, the procedure of Congress choosing a candidate, does it give his opponent the right to be abusive in a case where the presidential office is a titular one and of great respect, and everybody expects the nation to respect the honor of the presidency.
Absolutely.
So to say that Congress did this wrong or that wrong, whatever the Congress did, the point is that there has to be a measure of dignity to the election of an office of President of India.
Absolutely. We are joined by Professor Zoya Hasan, Professor of Political Science in the JNU and author of many books. Let me go to her. Zoya, the sanctity of campaign in the presidential elections. We have seen many campaigns in the past. This campaign, do you see any difference in the campaigns in the past and now?
Well, one obvious difference which you have hinted and I think Mr. Nihal Singh also hinted is that of course coalition era does mean that the concerns are different, but at the same time I think I completely agree with Mr. Nihal Singh. The opposition can expect some consultation, but at the same time they can't dictate what the ruling coalition will do. The ruling coalition has a right to choose its candidate. It has a right to follow a certain process, and to suggest, as the BJP has been repeatedly suggesting, that right in the beginning the Congress should have first consulted them even before consulting their allies. That's not possible. But that said, the fact remains that whatever be the process, I think unfortunately in this campaign, in this election campaign, the dignity and the sanctity of the constitutional office, which is, even if it's titular, it is an extremely important constitutional office, that has been lowered. And there can really be no justification. There can be no justification because I think, you see, in the past also you've always had frivolous kind of criticism, frivolous kinds of candidates. But I think this time it's not just about frivolous candidates raising all kinds of objections. But the principal opposition, the way in which they have conducted the campaign, I think has really breached the limits of decorum.
That's an important point, Mr. Sheshadri Chari. That's an important point which both Zoya Hasan and Nihal Singh is making. It is in the past also we have seen this kind of campaign. People have raised frivolous issues. But the opponent, the candidate, the principal opponent was not as much of a heavyweight as we see today. So don't you think that because the candidate is such a heavyweight, there is more responsibility to see that the campaign is more sober?
No. How do you assume that the UPA candidate is a heavyweight?
No, I'm talking of the NDA candidate. I'm talking of the NDA candidate. I'm talking of the principal candidate, principal opposition candidate,
It's not
who is also a heavyweight.
No. If you think, Mr. Girish, if you think the NDA candidate is not a heavyweight, similarly the UPA candidate is also not a heavyweight.
No, I'm not saying NDA candidate is not a... Mr. Chari, 1 minute. Mr. Chari, please let me
complete.
No, Mr. Chari, let me make it clear.
The candidate is a former speaker.
No, Mr. Chari, I am not saying, in fact, you have mistaken me. I am saying, in fact, I am saying exactly what you are saying, that NDA candidate is also a heavyweight. That's why I am asking, doesn't that give more responsibility to see that the campaign is more decorous?
See, the responsibility part of the campaign, as Mr. Nihal Singh said, this campaign itself is something new to the present kind of politics because of the coalition politics. If this campaign had to be avoided, it could have been avoided in the first place if the whole thing was done on the basis of a consensus. That was not done. So when Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, as a candidate of UPA, presidential candidate, goes to West Bengal, and when his party is speaking to the Chief Minister of West Bengal, the party is speaking to the chief party person of Samajwadi Party, and when they are trying to rope in all kinds of political parties, what do you expect the other candidate to do?
Mr.
The other candidate does not come up as an NDA candidate. He is being supported by 3 or 4 parties.
Absolutely.
Mind you, he is not being supported by all the parties of the NDA also.
Absolutely. Mr. Tariq Anwar, you heard Mr. Sheshadri Chari. He thinks that you people have created these problems. The UPA has created the problem. It's not your former distinguished member who has created the problem.
Oh, I don't agree with Mr. Chari. I think his argument is not valid, because as other panelists said, that this presidential election is a very prestige election, and everybody is watching, entire world is watching what is going on.
Yes.
And we should maintain dignity and prestige of this
Okay.
constitutional position.
Okay, let me come to Mr. Birendra Singh. Mr. Birendra Singh, let me take this discussion a little away from the present thing, and let us look at a larger picture. There are certain people, there are certain section of the people who think that, you know, people who get who are nominated for this presidential race, maybe, you know, they should not be so close. All these things have, all these allegations have begun because your candidate was a minister just about a week or 10 days ago. So, you know, do you think that in future, maybe there is all three of you, I want you to, you know, give your opinion on this. Maybe people who are not so closely connected to politics in such a short time, you know, becoming the candidate. Is this the reason why these kind of things crop up?
Actually, what I see is whosoever he is, the candidate should be closely associated with politics. That is what some of the parties, those supporting us, they have also made it clear in the beginning that we would like to have a president
Who is a politician.
Who is a politician. And
you don't see any problem in this?
no, I don't see. And of course, when you are one of the cabinet ministers,
right,
there may be certain things which the other candidate could
explore
and
exploit. Actually, Mr. S.Nihal Singh, you know, what is your view on this subject?
No,
so they are exploiting the fact that, you know, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee has just given up being a finance minister and held all these portfolios, and that gives the opponents the chance to raise this kind of charges. So, do you think that in future the candidates should have some distance from politics, at least for some time before they contest the elections?
It depends on the candidate, because if you look at the history,
yes,
Dr. Rajendra Prasad was very much a politician.
Absolutely.
And he had 2 terms
right,
as president.
Right.
And then, of course, you had a man like Radhakrishnan, who was a very distinguished academic apart from his other contributions. So it's very rare to have a Radhakrishnan.
Right.
And I think you have to rely on an ex-politician in terms of the duties of a president,
right,
especially in a coalition era.
Right.
I think it's useful to have a politician,
right,
with his instincts in terms of intervening when he should.
Yes.
In the rare instances, he has
needs
to intervene. So I think that is, I wouldn't buy
Zoya?
that.
You know, if we really look at all the presidents that we've had, it's been a mix of politicians and a few non-politicians. The difference this time, I think, is that Pranab Mukherjee is a very powerful politician. After all, we've had many politicians
right,
in the past, but he was the number 2 in the cabinet. Now,
right,
so I think it's just that is the kind of clout that he's had. He's been very powerful. He's had a very long innings in politics. But I think that's, that said, it is a political office.
Right.
And to that extent, I think you can't rule out politicians. But yes, yes, I mean, Pranab Mukherjee is a very powerful politician, and that has its own dynamics, and which is creating some of the issues that we are.
Right. Mr. Sheshadri Chari, what is your view on the subject? Do you think the one time that the BJP, which was when it was in power, when it had to appoint a president, you decided to choose a non-politician? Is that something which you think will solve these kind of problems in future, these kind of acrimonies coming up during the campaign? Is that what you think?
Yeah, I personally think it would be better if the presidential election still is done on a consensus basis.
Right.
So that there is no need for such an acrimonious situation to arise at all in the first place.
Right.
Number 2, whether he is a politician, a seasoned politician, experienced politician, or a non-politician, I think the constitutional provisions are so clear, crystal clear,
right,
that any XYZ of some stature who sits in that chair can execute the responsibilities of that post very well, if he follows the provisions of the constitution.
Right.
The unfortunate problem this time is everybody is looking at 2014, and I think every political party wants a president who will be probably quote unquote kind towards that particular political party or that particular unit when the 2014 election comes. And it's very unfortunate that
very
this
unfortunate.
presidential election is being looked at from the 2014 point of view.
Absolutely.
That is what is creating the maximum number of problems.
Mr. Tariq Anwar, last words to you. Do you think that two powerful politicians, who have been around for a long time, coming, contesting against each other, we cannot expect anything else but this kind of acrimony during the campaign? Is that, do you think so?
No, I agree with the panelists that you cannot fix this president post for any particular sect.
Right.
Or,
Section.
so sometime politician, sometime educationist, sometime non-politician. So I think this time Pranab Mukherjee's name is, of course, everybody will appreciate his contribution, his long inning in the politics, and he is a very, after a long inning, he is still very clean image.
Okay.
So I think his choice is very good choice, and opposition should not make it a prestige issue.
Okay.
They should accept his candidature.
Okay, Mr. Anwar, we completely run out of time. I would have loved to take the reaction of the other panelists in the studio, but anyway, we have completely run out of time. But there is a consensus that this campaign could have been more sober. We have very few days left for the campaign to end. 19th is the date when the elections to the president's post is going to be held. We have another 4-5 days left. We hope that during these 4-5 days, the campaign will, come down and become more sober, and we will see less acrimony during the elections. Thank you very much. Thanks to all my guests, Prof.Zoya, Hasan, Birendra Singh, Mr. S.Nihal Singh, Sheshadri, Chari, and Tariq Anwar. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on the big picture on Monday. Thank you very much.